Yeah, we're live. Let's see. Can I get better? Yeah, I like that better. Yeah, good. Side lighting. What's up, guys? It's 7 o'clock, right on the dot. Today was a good day. I got to actually go up again this morning and take a look at and try to find snakes. I did another snake video. I'm probably going to do a separate channel on that, so I won't be including that in this channel. But I found 2 rattlesnakes and 1 garter snake. Unfortunately, I had a little snafu with my camera. The garter snake, found him on the way down and was sitting there filming, playing with them and looking at them and all stuff, telling everybody about how cool they are and what they do. And then right after I let him go, I looked at my camera and realized that my camera was not on. So all I have is 1 picture of his tail. So that didn't turn out that well, but it was cool. I got to be up there and watch the bumblebees and, be out in nature and go look at all these, catch all these snakes. Caught a big rattlesnake. It had 11 rattles. So that's in there too. So that would be cool stuff. But today is all about comparing stroker motors. I'm working on a video right now that I'm hoping to finish editing tonight or tomorrow morning. And it is all about comparing a 400M. And the thing that the reason that I keep calling them 400Ms is because I like to see how many comments I get from people that tell me that it's not a 400M, it's just a 400. A 351M is the only M, and the 400 is not technically an M. But I want to see how many comments I get on that, so I always put 400M. Besides, when I put 400M, people know which 400 I'm talking about. When I just say 400 Ford, sometimes they get confused, so they don't know what we're talking about. So that's why I do that. But the interesting thing on this comparison is the stock 400M, after we rebuilt it and ran it with a 2-barrel carburetor and stuff, made almost exactly the same peak horsepower as a bone stock 5-liter 302 run the same way with headers and no accessories and stuff. So it's a really interesting comparison because they both made the same peak power. But obviously, the shapes of the curves are dramatically different between a 300-inch motor and a 400-inch motor. And despite, never mind the fact that one of them was carbureted and one of them was from the 70s and one of them was from the, I think that 5-liter probably was from the 90s, from the early 90s. So it's an interesting comparison. It shows why we put bigger motors in bigger, heavier vehicles, because even though, and in most cases, especially back then, guys weren't talking about horsepower. All they wanted is the thing to feel good and to move this heavy vehicle or to be able to tow with it and stuff. And it shows in the torque curve why a 400 is so much better. And it also shows why a 400, and basically this, by the way, this 400M, I call them stroker Clevelands because that's essentially what they are. Even though they're a tall deck, they use a Cleveland head. It's 400 inches. So it would be the equivalent of you doing a 408 stroker on a Windsor. And yes, I know you can do a Clevor, and people are, I'm sure, going to bring that up. But it's much easier to get a 400M and just start with that. You just have to make sure that we get the piston up to 0 deck, which we didn't do on this. We just rebuilt the bottom end kind of. So there's much more power to be had from that combination. But still, it was still a fairly good combination, but it worked very well stock and made a lot more torque than this comparison 302 that I dug out. And the only reason I do these kinds of things is I'm going through the dyno data and I look at it and go, hey, look at that horsepower number. That horsepower number is the same as, and then I have to try to remember the 18 million combinations that I've run. But I'm fairly familiar with a 5-liter 302 and how much power they make. So it's an interesting comparison, 300 versus 400, and the differences in the torque curves. But then once you modify them, even better things happen to a 400-inch motor that happen to a 300-inch motor. Because if we take a 302 and we put heads, cam, and intake manifold, it's going to be 400 or less horsepower. Most of them are more like 380 or 390. Some of the good ones are a little bit more than 400. But if you do that to a 400-inch motor, it's going to be another 100 above that at least. And in our case, it was almost 200 above that. So it was, it's quite a big difference because a 400-inch motor can just breathe a lot better. And if you give it enough camshaft and most importantly, if you give it enough cylinder head, which a ported set of Cleveland heads will definitely do, then good things happen on a 400-inch motor. So that's all I got to say. And also, we talked about, oh yeah, we did talk about our snake day today. That was good. So let's see where you guys are at and let me know what you guys think about the 400 and 302 kind of combination. That'll be an interesting little Ford deal. Let's see, 1979 351M, one of the greatest boat anchors you can find. Yeah, there is like zero love. I don't know of another you know, maybe a 312, maybe a Y block or something. I don't know of another motor that gets less love than a 351M or a 400M. I said it again. But still, like I said, when we ran them, I liked it. I was impressed with it. I thought that it did well, and it was a 400-inch motor and it had Cleveland heads on it, so it made good power. John's in the house. Tim's here. John, I already said John. Calvin's here. Scuba Sam, the Ozman, ProCharge Mopar. Lots of guys here. Let's see. Hope they weren't squirrel burgers. Let's see. As a guy who owned mostly trucks, the 351 400M all day long over the gutless 302 351. No comparison. It's like comparing a 292 to a 4.5 out of a Land Cruiser. See, that's a big difference. Let's see. How much boost do you think you could push in a 400M smog motor of the 70s? Also, you do think they had good flowing heads since they were like 7.5 to 1 compression. The compression was way down. They had big dish pistons and they were way down in the hole anyways, and they had big chamber heads. So they really had nothing going for them, but they did have low compression. So the thing that I would be worried about most on a 400M with boost is the rod. They're because of the deck height on that thing, I think the rod length is super long. And so I would kind of be worried about that. But it's like every other motor. You know that you can run boost on it. And if you put a set of 351 4V Cleveland heads on it and you don't put a forged piston in it like we did, it'll make good power and then run boost on it and good things will happen. I can't remember. I don't think we ran nitrous on that, but we should have. And I should have run boost on it too. But it made really good power NA. I was kind of surprised that because the 400 and the 351M even more so do not have a reputation of making good power. But if you look at the torque curves on this video I'm doing, it does have good torque though. Chris says the 351M only needs compression to make it great. I agree. There are a lot of motors like that. A lot of the Dodge stuff is like that too. They're so far down in the hole. They could be, 180 or 190 thousandths down. It's just not good. Jesse wanted to know about the availability of cranks, heads, and intakes for the motor. I assume you're talking about the 400M, but we ran spacers and ran the 351 Cleveland intake manifolds, like we ran the Performer RPM air gap, and then we ran a couple of others. We ran some CHI 3V stuff, and I think that they have a 400M manifold also, or at least they used to. CHI did, because I think that that's what Kazi used. I don't think he used one with adapters on it. Like we had thick adapter plates that the guys from MPG Heads did for us. Lots of cams available for them. I don't know about cranks. Somebody does stroker stuff for them. We just use the factory crank. They do use the larger trans bolt pattern. The 400M was more of a replacement for the 460, so it has that bigger bolt pattern. Tim Meyer, that's the name I was looking for. Swapped 454 into my boat. Good. Big meaty torque. Yeah, the 385 and the 351M and the 400M both use the same trans, so you can put a C6 behind it. Is the Performer 400 intake a decent price? I don't know. I can't remember looking. We ran an air gap, but we ran a 351 Cleveland air gap on it. I did run a Y-end because that was kind of the go-to manifold for stock replacement manifolds. And the manifold picked up a fair bit of power going to the Y-end intake and a 4-barrel carburetor compared to the 2-barrel, the factory 2-barrel stuff, which you would expect it to. The nice thing also is that it lost no low-speed power, and guys will be happy because we ran the 400M all the way down starting at 2,000 RPM because it was a low RPM motor anyways. So we ran it from like 2,000 to 5,000 or something. So we have that long of a sweep. But when we added the 4-barrel, it just added more power, kept all the power that the 2-barrel had, and then just added more power out farther. Yeah, Martin, they're down pretty far in the hole. Yeah, Brian, they were not noted for their tremendous fuel mileage. Although oddly enough, that's why they made that motor, was so that it could get better mileage than a 460. Montana's in the house. Yeah, Daniel, if you put a 4V quench head, the small chamber 4V head, it works pretty well. Richard, have you read any of David Vizard's books on head porting? Yes, I have. I've read all of David's stuff. I've met him and talked to him a few times. He's a sharp guy. 4.9 liter V8 in 1980, and the Mustang was crap. Are you talking about the 5 liter? Because you shouldn't ever say an unkind word about the 5 liter Mustang. That's the earlier one. Well, but even in the early, they started in 82. So they started with like 157 horsepower, and then it went to 175, and went up to 200 and 205, and then 210 or 225. So they kind of, that was the start of the performance wars. That was kind of the start of the new muscle car era. There we go. Matthew's chiming in with the no M. Go to any tractor pull event and you'll find the 351 400Ms represented in large numbers. See, so that's where all of those junkyard motors go. They go to tractor pulls, which is awesome. I'm glad to see that they're using them. Martin, I've never done anything with Tim Meyer pistons. We didn't use his stuff. Yeah, the 400 Mopar is another one. Bill is in the house. The 400 is already a stroker. It's already big. Darren, that's a good combination. We don't see a lot of those here. A 400M with 2V closed chamber, the Aussie heads, they're not readily available here. I see those occasionally, but I still want to do the 2V, 4V, 351 Cleveland shootout because I saw some other guys do it, and I have my doubts about the results. I don't know if it's the same guy, David, but somebody keeps talking about putting LS heads on a 351. I don't know why people think that that's such a neat thing. There's another no 400M. I like that, so I like when people talk about that. I really want to do a full roller block, GT40P heads, and a 289 crank and rods. All right. I'm running 400 Holly Street Contender. I haven't run one of those. Arizona's in the house. The 400 replaced the 390, the FE motor. Tossed a rod at over 900 horsepower with turbos. Nice. Mark's here, 4,200 power. Callie's in the house. No, Daniel, I'm not saying that it was a factory performance motor. I'm telling you that you can make performance out of that motor, because if you put good heads on it, just like every motor, if you put good heads on it and a good intake manifold and a good camshaft, it will make power. It's 400 inches. So if you add those things to a 400-inch motor, if you take a look at the video, I mean, it made 565 or 570 or something like that, which is right in line with other, street-oriented 408s that we've put together. So that displacement plus good heads and cam and intake, good things happen. Let's see, Mark, the correct answer to your question from Friday, 4,200 and a wide open throttle, 27 to 29 degrees. That seems more like it. That seems more in line with what we run on most things. Hot Rod built one with almost 400 horsepower. That's good. They're only 160 or 70 away from the one that I did. They'll get there, though. They're new. Shout out to my Hot Rod guys. Would a mother thumper cam work in a 347 stroker and a turbo? Yes, but it wouldn't be my first choice. But if you already have that and you want to put a turbo on it, you can run boost on that. I wouldn't combine them if you hadn't bought either one of those. There's a much better cam choice for that. Race Tech recently released the high deck piston. So is that 413 by 398? Is that also with the stock rod length? Yes, you can swap 351 400M heads onto a Windsor block. It's a cleavor. I mean, it's done a lot. Richard, what do you think about getting together with MagnaFlow to do some high flow catalytic converter testing versus none? Why would we want to test that? The 400M is a V8. The LS351 block is the first video suggested under this live stream. That's interesting. I had to dig out my ancient laptop tuning. Yeah, it was that way with the Coyote and the LS and the Hemi and most modern things. Some things we've seen want a little bit more than that, but that's usually where we end up is, 27, 28, 29 degrees, depending on which ECU we're using. My dad has an Aussie XAGT coupe with a 351 Cleveland stroke to 408. That's a good combination. Oh, so the early 400 blocks had both both bolt patterns on the bell housing. Cool. Yeah, Jeff, the Pro Comp heads are the same as Speedmaster. I think that Dr. J's did the ones that I had, so that they weren't just off the shelf ones, if I remember correctly. Jet, what's up? Thank you very much. Phil loves the 462 valve videos. Those are cool. Matt Mullins in the house from, you got to check in though. You got to check in from Arizona. I need to come visit you. So we need to go look for snakes out there because they have, you guys have good stuff. You have coral snakes out there. You also have Western Diamondbacks. Yeah, the 400M hot rod I did was a very mild build. If you look at the one that I did, we did very, very mild, like we did stock with headers and a 2-barrel, and then I put a 4-barrel on it. And I think with a 4-barrel on it, I think it was only about 300 horsepower. And then we stepped up a lot. Then we went to ported heads and a mild cam and a dual plane. And then that was a lot. That was, I think that was getting near 500 or something, if I remember correctly. Richard, how do I get an RCS high-rise intake? What is RCS? Test the converters because my wife doesn't like the smell. A high flow converter, we've run lots of stock exhaust stuff on the chassis dyno, and you can make a lot of power through converters. And if you have to have them because it has to be emissions legal, then just do it. Richard, I have two Edelbrock 800 carbs. Will they work well on a 500 horsepower 462 big block tunnel ram? That's probably more than you need for a 500 horsepower motor. They'll work, and at wide open throttle, if you get them to wide open throttle, especially if we're loading it at 3,000 RPM like we do on the dyno, it works just fine. We've run two 950s on something like that. It's just that they don't drive around nearly as well as smaller ones do. And the smaller ones you're not going to lose any power. All you're going to do is add drivability with two smaller carbs on that tunnel ram. Carl, I announced that I might have access to a Godzilla motor. Mahovitz has one, and he asked me if I wanted to do some stuff with it, so I might be taking him up on that. The mountains of upstate New York. Are you in the Catskills, Pablo? Oh, Gila monsters too. I forgot about those. The poisonous serpents. I would love to catch one of those. I want to. That's on my bucket list too. I want to catch a Gila monster, and also chuckwallas. I want to go catch some chuckwallas. Thank you, Jeff. Yetis. Very squatchy area. Carl, we have cobras in Sacramento. At the reptile display. Oh, my dinosaur shirt. My wife made me these shirts. She needs to do some more, maybe. The Godzilla seems to work well, but it's a big motor, a relatively big motor. It has good heads. Obviously, guys have already ported them. Barnes, what are you doing? Get a haircut. You're starting to look like a hippie. I do. It is time to, but it's the weekend. You know, I got to enjoy the weekend. On the Godzilla thing, if you port the heads, they work well. That does good. You put a big camshaft in it. It already has lots of displacement, and then you make a custom intake manifold like Brian and Evan did, and it makes good power. That's not surprising. I mean, we're just talking about a 400M. The 7.3 is a little bigger than that, right? What's a 7.3? Is that a 440-inch motor or something like that? 7 liters, 427. What was the compression of the 400M when you started? I don't know what the stock compression is. It's pretty low. Is it worth stroking a perfectly good running 4.22 valve 4.6, or should I get an extra cam and turbo? Seems like there would be more return on investment. I wouldn't recommend stroking it over going with boost. Boost will get you a lot more power on that than stroking it will. And a cam would definitely help. Barnesy 59. RB is what I would rather do before a Godzilla motor, actually. Tom, the 400 hasn't, the aftermarket support hasn't changed dramatically, but there's enough, and there's enough old school stuff to do it too. Like, you know, like I said, if you can get some 351 heads, well, I take that back. There are more 351 Cleveland heads available now than there were back in the day. There's a lot of aftermarket heads. Most guys are making them. So, and they're aluminum heads, which is better than using a cast iron 351 Cleveland head, like a factory one, a factory 4B head. Yeah, an SS396 Chevelle would be much more desirable than a 400M. Mark, I've seen the 351 and the LS stuff. I've seen that combination. But the thing is that there's lots of good LS motors with LS heads, and there's lots of good 351 Windsor motors and heads. I don't know why you would want to go to, other than just as a gee whiz thing, to go to the trouble of putting that head that has a different bore spacing on it. Why you'd want to go to the trouble of making that work when there are already options for it. Like, I could see if this was back in the day, if this was 1969 or 1970, and there were no 351 Windsor or 5-liter aluminum heads available for a 351, and a guy had an LS head, I can see then putting it on and making it work. There's just so many good things available for them. Take a look at all the videos that we did on all the cylinder head tests, and you have heads that can make a bajillion horsepower without having to like reinvent the wheel. And I applaud the guy that did it. It's a lot of work, and it's awesome, and it's a good video. I just don't know what the practicality of it is, other than as a gee whiz kind of thing. 445 cubic inches. Richard, I want to run around 500 lift or more on a small block Chevy 383. My only weak point is Vortec heads. Can I run them for now? A Vortec head is really good, especially if you do any kind of minor porting to it. Do the machine work necessary to put springs on it that will allow you to run camshaft in that thing, and those heads work really well. It's probably the best flowing stock head that they ever made. San Antonio, Texas. 403 Olds for a 6.6 liter showdown. Yeah, the Aussie 2V heads are small chamber, right? 58 cc's. Okay, versus 71. 444.9 is the cubic inches. John stepping in with the 7.3 information. Mike, the way to calculate how much horsepower you make per pound of boost is take the NA power output of your motor and not at the wheels, at the flywheel, and then divide it by 14.7. That's how much power you should make for every pound of boost. What cam specs affect emissions? All of them can, and also none of them can. It depends a lot. We've run really big cams in stuff that has catalytic converters and stuff, and it depends what you mean by affect emissions. If you're talking about which one would actually pass a sniffer test and not pollute, given their designation, their level of designation for not polluting, given the limitations that they have for the test, you can put a lot of camshaft in it, and if it's tuned properly, it will pass with flying colors, especially with cats. But if you don't have cats on there, that gets much, much harder. Richard, do you think a 10-to-1 compression 340 engine with 68 cc combustion chamber, 190 cc intake runner would work well? Be overkill on a hot street? It's not going to be overkill. 190 cc head is small for a 340. That's fine, as long as you have the right camshaft in it. And I kind of hope you're talking about a 340 Dodge. Junkyard Digs, they do a 400. If you do a 400 2V and port the heads, and especially if you can get some compression out of that thing, like if you put Aussie heads on it or a 4V head on it, if you don't want to go to a 4V, put a 2V head on it, but port the 2V stuff, put a camshaft in it, dual plane 4-barrel intake manifold, and it'll make a good torquey street motor. It'll work out really well. Mark, he didn't do a big bang on it because that's a different thing. Yeah, the cats don't. A high flow cat does not restrict power. Certainly not in a lot of these guys that take the cats off are just doing it on like mild or stock motors because they think that that's a performance upgrade. But it's not really, because that's not where they're what's limiting their power. That's not restricting their power output on a mild combination. For a 400M truck, where you want low end torque, better to keep the stock heads intake on a 2-barrel? No, it's not better to do that. And you'll see that in the video tomorrow. If you put a 4-barrel on it, it makes the same torque even at 2,000 RPM as a 2-barrel. It just makes more power everywhere after that. So a 4-barrel is definitely a good way to go. If you can get more compression, that will help power everywhere. A mild camshaft will help power everywhere. So there are a lot of things that you could do and not give up any low speed torque. In fact, you're going to be enhancing it quite a bit. Iowa's in the house. Have you ever looked at the CVVD heads that are coming out? No, I'm not familiar with those. Yeah, I'm big in Iowa. just like David Hasselhoff is in Germany. Richard, I was wondering if it would still run right if I have more lift than the head will flow. I mean, working on a car, but the performance side is another animal. Yes, you can if you're even if your head stops flowing like it's max flow, and we went over this in another live feed. If your head stops flowing at 500 lift and levels off so it flows the same or even slightly less at 550 lift, you can still run a 550 lift cam on it and it will still make more power usually. Junkyard, what you want to do is get that piston up to TDC. And that's why I don't like that 2V, the US 2V head. It's more detonation prone too. So get the piston up to TDC, have a better piston design that has better quench. And I think you'll be much better off on the detonation problem. Matt, I don't have too many cars. I have 1, 2, 3. I think 3 right now. Cast iron heads versus aluminum heads and add nitrous. Can you explain the difference in timing retard and pinging between the two? Honestly, I might add another degree if I had an iron head. But the general consensus is that the iron head retains more heat, and so it's going to be more. First of all, they say that it makes more power because of that, but the other consensus is that it's more prone to detonation than aluminum head. So I think that that's true. I wouldn't run an iron head on a real performance application. I would run. I mean, we have on the dyno, but we're running it cold and stuff. I'd much prefer an aluminum head. So I probably would take another degree or two of timing away on an iron head. But that's not a back-to-back test that I've ever run where I've actually been able to determine the detonation threshold because we don't have a way to monitor detonation. Yeah, the cats can get hot, that's for sure, on the farm vehicles. Joel, what's up? Thank you very much. Have you ever tested any Chuck Newton carbs? No, I haven't. Is he related to Fig or Olivia? Yeah, Newton puns. My sister's in Iowa. And that's what I'm saying, Matt. I'm huge in Iowa, and I know that she should come on here and watch. And if you talk to her, give her a big hug for us. Everybody love Michelle. Your big block Chevy Camaro has me rethinking the 256, but a stroke 350 would do good too. Not way too many choices. Just stay with the 6-cylinder. It's just cool. It has a different kind of cool. Which one of the CNC small block foreheads do you like the best? It just depends on which one. That's usually a cost thing. Most people determine what head they're going to buy based on cost. If you want to make the most power, then you buy the best head, and that's going to be an airflow research or a trick flow. Or if you're going like really, really far, there are other, cannon valve heads and those kinds of things. Do we want to do a big bang on a 400M? That's not really on the list. I thought it was enough just doing one series on it. And I was surprised that, although people did really like it. Yeah, John Causey knows how to make 400M power, that's for sure. What's your opinion on E Street heads? All of the ones that we've tried have worked well. I don't remember directly comparing the E Street head to something else where I could get like a real honest comparison. But whenever we've run them, they've kind of done what we thought that they were going to do. John wants to put a VMP2 supercharger on a 351. You should be able to adapt that. You have to basically make a lower intake manifold that's a box that will accept. If this, I haven't seen that VMP2 configuration to see how they have that integrated, the intercooler integrated into that. But essentially, those things normally have the intercooler brick sticking out of the bottom of them, and they sit down like in a 462 valve or Coyote, they sit down in a valley. In the 351, it's going to be a little more difficult. It's going to be taller because whatever the height is of that intercooler brick, if it sticks down below the blower, if it's above the blower, that like the Cadillac STS was, that makes life easier. Then it's easier to package. But basically, you need it in a box so that the air can go in through the intercooler and then out into the ports. Richard, please discuss the former build you provided for the performance build section of the SA Design Book Ford 351 Cleveland engines. 675 and 7,000. That was not me, unfortunately. I've done a number of books for SA Designs, but Ford 351 Cleveland engines was not one of them. I didn't write that book. Can 427 sock heads be used on a 428 FE? The block should be the same, so I don't know why they shouldn't be able to. If anybody else knows why that wouldn't be the case, but the camera though is a different block too. I think it's not just heads. I don't think that they used. Did they use I thought the camera was its own block also. That it was not just like a 427 side over block. Iowa's in the house. See, Iowa, everybody. Happy to help, Richard. I know the Nova has just been hiding. Been trying to locate some 20511Rs. Yeah, it's hard to get cylinder heads and stuff right now. A lot of stuff is on back order. Yeah, Matt, the best big bang, like the best explosions are the diesel things. Those are really catastrophic. Is there a way to determine compression on an assembled engine without tearing it apart? Not unless they didn't measure the stuff and you know exactly what they are and where those things are. You can get an idea, but it won't be accurate. Compression test on my 331, 160, 158, 158, 165, 158, 62, 59, 64. I'm at 5,000 feet. Yeah, those numbers are fine. And is that a running motor? Or is that a brand new motor? What's going on with the motor? I don't really do a lot of diesel stuff, so I haven't run Power Stroke stuff other than on the chassis dyno. Yeah, and the 256 is just kind of cool. I mean, if you're looking for more power, you don't put that motor in, you put something else in. But that's not the reason that everybody that chooses that. They're not trying to go drag race. I'm going to go run 8s with a 250 inline 6-cylinder. That's a really steep hill to climb. But when you pop the hood and everyone sees that it's an inline 6-cylinder, that's a different thing. Oh yeah, so I was right. The single overhead cam deal is its own block. I thought so. I didn't think that you could just pop those heads on with different, change and gears and stuff and make it work. How much nitrous can a tune port motor take? I know that we've run 125 shots on them a lot, and I think I would run more than that. The thing that I'm worried about is on the tune port deal, like most motors, if you start going up in the amount of nitrous that the motor will actually take, you have to make sure that it's distributed equally to all the runners, and that's hard to do. Although they had some cool back in the day. I remember the guys from NOS had fogger setups for the tune ports, and that works really well. So if you want to really get after it, then you could do that. But I wouldn't recommend going to real big shots on a on a like a throttle body plate, like a lot of guys do, or just like a single fogger in front of the throttle body. I'd be a little concerned about distribution after that. TFS Twisted Wedge or TFS Cleveland heads. For what size motor, Ramon? In either of those will work. One of them is just going to be more work than the other one. Mike, I don't know anything about the SCT stuff. So what question is Tom asking? Trying to scroll back there, Tom, to see what you're talking about. Yeah, Mike, that was those diesel things are really crazy. I like when they split apart and then keep running. The ProMax small block Ford heads that we've tested worked well. What's a good daily driving old Ford? Like an old truck or something? Nitrous or turbo, a 5-liter GT40P, trick flow stage 1 cam, MSD digital 6A headers, T5 8.8. What intake manifold is on that? Is that a Toasty? Is that an EFI motor or a carbureted motor? TPI built up a lot of back pressure with plates. Popped off a lot during tuning. Could not hit it below 4,000 RPM. You already passed the torque peak there. When we ran them on Corvettes and on Camaros back in the day, we'd hit them less than 3,000 sometimes. Yeah, the 292 with the 4-barrel works good. I'm a little disappointed in the 292 only in the intake design. Well, it's the head design that's the problem. It's a Siamese port, and I'm not a big fan of that. They work really well for what they're supposed to do. I'm much more excited about the Ford one, and obviously about the 4200 and doing that. That's going to be super cool, and the Slant 6, and hopefully a Jeep after that. Happy Sunday, Aaron. We're all working with 30-year-old books and information for the 400. Hawaiian Stealth high-rise dual plane Edelbrock AVS 2650. Okay, is that the intake that you're talking about? It's nitrous is really easy on a carbureted combination. If you're talking about the small block Ford, now I'm lost a little bit. But if you're talking about the small block Ford and you have a carbureted intake on it, then a nitrous is an easier deal. If it's an EFI deal, then I would run a turbo on it, or a blower would be another option. Matt, which motors do you want me to move on to? Which modern Ford motors, like the 2-valve 4.6, 4-valve 4.6, or even more modern than that, like Coyote? An EcoBoost 4-cylinder. I've only run those on the chassis dyno. I've never run one of those on the engine dyno. Mark has a Honda question. I've been a long time since I answered one of those. Currently build an LSV-Tech 82mm with PR3 pistons, B16 head, Type R cams, SuperTech springs, Honda S300. I have Pro Series intake and a P30. Which one would I go with? What are you asking about? I have Pro Series intake and a P30. Which Pro Series do you have? Is it a Skunk Pro Series intake and a P30? And which type? You have a Type R head. Okay, that's going to be a P30. If it's a Pro Series skunk intake, then that's going to be probably more like, isn't that going to be more like a Type R? A P30 is going to make more low speed power all the way up to about 7,000 than a Type R, and the Pro Series might be comparable to that. There's no progress on the turbo slant yet. I haven't put the head back on. Without allegiance to a brand, which I don't have, 302, 351, small block Chevy LS for a 500 to 600 horsepower and packaging for a 72 Pinot. Obviously, there's small block Ford kits for the Pinot, so that makes life easy. It'll be less money for you to do, since you're having to do a swap in that anyways, it will be less money for you to do an LS and make that kind of power. P30 or Skunk 2 Pro Series. If you're talking about a stock P30, the Skunk 2 is going to make more power on the top, but the stock P30, which is a B16A intake manifold, will make more power through a lot of the RPM range. It has a longer runner on it. Warfighter is saying put a 460 with a carb into the Pinot. That's another way to go. And if you're going to do that, you might as well do a tunnel ram too. The SB2 stuff would be possible to make them into street motors. Guys have run them in drifting, and Westech has a few of those, or had a few of those that they'd run. The problem is you need to go through a lot of things before you can be a street motor. A lot of those motors have to be heated up before they're started. The bearing clearances are just so. The oil that you have to use, their dry sump stuff. The ring packages are really, really tiny. The pistons obviously are not designed for boost. The camshafts were, depending on what series it was and what actual race it was designed for, because they have different short track motors than they do speedway motors and stuff. Depending on how much power it made, you might have to reconfigure the whole motor. It might be expensive. Tom says he used a single fogger in front of the throttle plate with a 175 shot and hit it inside the intake duct, 4,000 RPM, poof. So did you blow something up? I've got a 3.4 liter, just turbo GT3582. It doesn't run spool wheel until 3,000 RPM. Do you think that a GT3071 would be too little? Probably not. What kind of power are you wanting to make on the 3.4? My intercooler capacity is pretty limited because of size. Well, what I want you to do before you're thinking about putting another turbo on it is try to measure back pressure, and also try to measure, at least even just change the position of your boost gauge before and after that intercooler, and tell me what's going on there. Let's see here. How does a 302 do in a Ford 4x4? In a little Ranger, it does really good. Richard, what do you recommend I do with this remanufactured 351M 400 I have out of an old 79 Ranchero? Take a look at the video and you can see the mods that we did to it. But there's a lot of cheap stuff. It depends on what you want to, what are you going to put it back in the Ranchero? Yeah, Toasty, if you have a Wyand high-rise and an AVS2 650 carb, just put a nitrous plate under it. My opinion on the Chevy 250 inline six, it works good. It works good for what it's supposed to do. And then you can also turbocharge it at low boost, and that will work good for doing that as well. Yeah, Mark, and you'd want to match the P30 to, you don't want to have a lot of camshaft in that. If you've got Type R cams, that's fine for a P30. I did lots of back-to-back testing on P30s versus Type R stuff, and it surprised a lot of people because everybody back in the day thought that, oh, the same way that everybody thought that LS6 stuff was the way to go. Oh, you got to put these 243 heads on everything. Got to put them on 4.8s, got to put them on 5.3s. And everybody was the same thing with all the Type R stuff. Oh, you got to put Type R intake manifold on your V16. It makes a lot more power. Yeah, it does at 8,600. But everywhere below 8,000, it makes less than the P30. And the reason that people didn't know that is because nobody ever tested that. They just said that. They just thought, oh, Type R, it's, Type R is a Type R. That's the way to go. Got to put the red valve cover on. Got to put the Type R intake, put the Type R cams, which the Type R cams work very well. But the intake manifold does trade power, just like any shorter runner intake manifold does. I have done stuff with the little 60-degree V6s, but it was on the chassis dyno. We did a 3100 or a 3400 in a Grand Am, and I can't remember now which one it was because I don't remember what year it was, but we did a turbo on it. What's a good recipe for a 400 to 500? See, a 400 to 500 range is a lot. A 400 horsepower one is a different motor than a 500 horsepower small block Ford. In a 95 F-150 off-road truck with 35 to 37-inch tires. My recommendation for that would be to go to a stroke 351 and not a stroke 302 version. Let's see here. I need to get down to the bottom here. Somebody was talking about being a long-haired hippie. I think that it was actually directed at me because of my long hair. Yeah, 500 horsepower on a 302, making it readable is difficult. It's easy with boost, but it's really hard to do it in a. Two 5.0s with GT40 heads for $105. That's a good deal. So I'm looking for 5 to 550 horsepower range without going to a 351. So Toasty, does it have boost in it, I hope? How do you figure turbo exhaust size to intake size for a particular power band? The power band is going to be determined actually by the motor and not by the turbo. The only way you're going to change the power band with the turbo is to alter boost during the power band. So the power band where the motor wants to run efficiently is going to be determined by the heads, the cam, and the intake of the motor that you have. When you add boost to that, it's going to be the same. Although all those numbers will just be higher. If you have a rising boost curve, you can artificially change that a little bit. TFS Twisted Wedge or TFS Cleveland on a 9.2 deck Windsor block. Raymond, tell me how much power you want to make, and I'll tell you how to get to that power level so that you're not trying to decide between those two. Richard, looking at a 6.4 Hemi block. Question is, what did you use to run the coils and injectors on the 5.7 we ran? Well, we ran a Holley HP management system on the Hemi that I ran, on the 5.7 that I ran. On the 5.7, the later model Hemi, I think that I'm thinking that they ran a Holley on that too, and they were able to run the variable cam and the variable intake manifold, which was cool. Toasty, I sprayed mine all the time. I'm hoping that you have more ring gap in it, even though I never put ring gap in my Mustang. I probably went through 20 bottles with that motor. GT3582. Yeah, we got what you need, Noodles. What bore and stroke would you feel comfortable with? Told if I'm running boost, I don't want to go over 408. You don't need to go over 408. In fact, if you're running boost on it, I don't know that you need to go to a 408. A 351 with good heads, cam, and intake, and then a 1,000 horsepower turbo is going to get you to 1,000 horsepower. If you have a 408 with a 1,000 horsepower turbo, you're still going to get to 1,000 horsepower. So you don't need to spend the money on the stroker stuff when a 351 will get you there with boost. Warfighter Racing goes big as you want. You can go to a 460 small block running all the boosts. You can't do that with a stock block. Curious about building a 5.0 LS base motor out of a 4.8 or 5.3 junkyard block. What's your recommendation for a budget-based approach? Do you want the 5-liter, the exact 5-liter displacement? If that's what you want, start with a 4.8 and bore it, and you can get to 5 liters. That's really easy. I know, Mike, 4-to-1 watch to like ratio. What's up with that? It should be the other way around. I should have more likes than I have people here. Yes, all the knowledge just pushed all the hair out. I've got Brodex heads and 10-to-1 compression, looking for a camshaft. Tim, you got to give me more information on that. What motor is it, and what are you trying to do with it? And Aaron, yeah, they did the new heads are better than the old Pro Comp stuff. They changed suppliers, and so a lot of the stuff is much better. Some of it is not. I have stock ring gap, pulled both GT40 heads from the junkyard. How much were you spraying all the time? We ran, I had 100 shot on mine, and I ran it all the time. When I say all the time, I constantly ran out of bottles. I ran it on the road course. I ran it on the drag strip. I ran it on an oval. I had it turned on everywhere that I went, and so used it anytime that I thought I was going to lose. And since I was basically a stock 5-liter Mustang, even though it was a 5-liter notch 5-speed 308 optional rear end, it was still not terribly fast. It was a lot better with a nitrous. So we ran the heck out of it all the time. Would you trust those built short blocks from Summit Racing? Yes, I would. Oh, Tim, so you were asking about the cam. You have, Tim, there's lots of big block stuff I have up on the site. If it's a 462 and you want streetable power, look for something that's like a 274, 282 kind of comp cam. Look at those specs and see what you like there. And that will work good on that size motor. Yeah, if you're gonna try to make a 460 out of your, or even a 427, I went through this with somebody else. They wanted to make a 427 out of their stock 351 block, and I had to tell them that you can't do that. It's way too much trouble, and it's just not gonna be worth it. You might be able to sleeve that block and make that work, but I've never seen anybody do that on a 351 block though. All right, Mark, that's what I like to hear. Hit that like button. I know, I'm looking forward to the L67 series too. What's your take on the Ellis hybrid small block Chevy block? I've never tested one of those. I thought it was interesting that they did that, and if it's the one that I'm thinking about, where they did the small block Chevy bottom end, they did that basically to get rid of the oiling issues that are associated with the LS stuff, and more for like real heavy duty racing applications. Because if you look at like trophy trucks and off-road and stuff, and you see that the LS guys are not doing well there. The more conventional small blocks and now big blocks are doing much better there, and even the OEMs were addressing that oiling issue, because that's why they changed when they changed from a Gen 3 to a Gen 4 block. They put communication windows in there to get rid of some of the pumping that was going on. So that's why they did that, I think, and that's what the guys were talking about when they did that. But I just have never run one of those and don't know, like, as an ultimate power deal, what it would be. That would be a good question for Brian when I talk to him. A big block stroker is easy to hit 600. If you look at the 496 that I did, that's simple. Tom, that's a loaded question. I like to get the lift from the cam, but a lot of guys run in race applications run real high rocker ratios too. And sometimes they do that so that they can get the valve train geometry that they want. $226, $234, $110, $355 Vortec, and an $83 Monte Carlo. Yeah, as long as that thing doesn't have a lot of lift, then you're okay with a Vortec head. We have not run the Atlas 4200 yet, so you didn't miss anything yet. For nitrous drag racing, where do I want my peak power at? Well, if you're drag racing, you want it as high as possible. But unfortunately, most people can't afford to do that. Raymond, either one of those heads will easily do that amount of power. A stock small block Chevy cannot run a lot of bore unless you have a 400 block, but then there are limitations to that too. The LS has a 4-inch bore, and the LS3 and LS7 have even bigger bores, so that's not really a consideration. I don't, Daniel, I haven't had any experience with a camera motor. I don't even remember seeing one run at West Tech. Warfighter, I think he's talking about a ported trick flow head, like an 11R or something, in which 500 and 550 is an easy number, especially with a 400-inch or even a 351 if you rev it high enough. Those numbers are pretty easy. Would you stroke the 5-liter turbo or nitrous if you had to pick one? The most power that you would make is with a turbo. Cuddy, I'm not the guy to ask for 350 old stuff. I've never even run one. And is a 7A some sort of factory Oldsmobile head? And I would think that a factory head would have a hard time supporting 500 horsepower. Does it flow more than 250 CFM? Yeah, Goodman, they don't need low lift. What they need are small base circle cams normally to clear, and usually it's a rod interference with the camshaft. Any builds done with Indy racing? No, I haven't run any of the Indy stuff. I think Dulcich has though. Tuning tips for pump gas on old school big block. Depends on a lot of things. Is it a high compression big block? How much camshaft does it have? Are you running 91? I'm hoping. Is it a carbureted one? You just have to play with the distributor and the advanced curve on the distributor. Mark, no, a 6-liter LS is a 4-inch bore. 6.2 is a 4.065, and an LS3 is a 4.125 bore. Mr. Dashian, you can have your stock LS1 heads ported. They're probably a 241. You can have those ported, and it works very, very well. You can, if you take a look at the stuff that I had done from Total Engine Airflow, I've had 5.3s ported by them, 5.7s. They all have kind of the same program, and they ended up flowing really well. So having the stock ones ported is definitely an option. I think that the old Bush Grand National stuff, they were 5-liter V6s, but I don't know how they came to that. I don't know if they used aftermarket blocks to get from 4.3 up to 5 liters. Oh, cool, Dave. We work for Dove on the single override cam 427 tooling. Yeah, the big block forward, the 460 stuff is you can get those pretty big without having to worry about doing too much grinding. I don't think the journal size plays a part in how they respond to boost. So a 400 with boost is going to do the same thing that a 455 under boost does. It's just going to multiply whatever power is there. You bored your 76 4-bolt small block Chevy 80 over? That seems like a lot, but I'm glad that you had it sonic checked. Yeah, there are clearance connecting rods, so they're designed to have the rod cap and shoulder of the rod and stuff smooth and tapered and chambered or whatever. they're machined or massaged so that and positioned where the bolt is positioned in the rod, so that they have more clearance for the camshafts. Will the non-roller cam 351 motors take the same cams as the rollers? Just add retrofit roller lifters. You can run retrofit roller cams, but I don't know if the retrofit roller cams are small base circle. Somebody else would need to answer that. It's been a long time since I ran I thought that we did small base circle ones because the lifter bore is different on the non-roller blocks. So somebody else might be able to answer that. I thought that they were small base circle cams to kind of keep the lifter down in that bore, because the lifter bore length was different. The other guy's Olds 350 diesel converted to gas. Somebody else was asking me about that, Mark, about if I've ever done that. And the thing is that I like the fact that it has a forged crank, but blocks having really thick sleeves, it's never the block that breaks on a big bang motor. It's always the rod or the piston. So while that's a good thing, if it still has stock rods and pistons in it, that's the thing that's probably going to break. I'm putting 180cc Promax heads on my 5-liter and using Explorer upper and lower. Do you think it would choke the flow way down over the Systemax intake? Yes, the Explorer upper and lower is going to make less power than the Systemax. Look at the videos I have up. I have a test on that. Ours was a ported version of the Systemax intake, but the Systemax will make more power at the top because it has different runner lengths also. I think that the entry on the Systemax might be bigger also than the Explorer is. So you will definitely not make as much power as if you put a single plane or a dual plane intake manifold on there either, if it was carbureted. Yeah, you don't need lifters popping up out of the bores. Okay, 2 minutes. I at 1:10. I got to leave. 1 hour and 10 minutes. If you severely lightened a crank and knife edged it, but did nothing else, how much horsepower would you free up? It would depend more on the weight, how much weight you're taking off. I don't know how much weight change you're talking about. So you would see some. I don't think it would be a lot. And if the knife edging, would depend on the oil level. If that's helping you get rid of windage, you might pick up some from that too. But I don't think it's going to be a ton. Have you ever big banged a 5-liter block? No, we've broken some, but not. I haven't done a specific big bang on a 5-liter, only on a 351. Snakes, yeah. I did catch some snakes today. It was a good day. Yeah, but then it's not a big bang thing. If I put an aftermarket piston in it, then it's no longer a stock thing, which is what the big bang deal is all about. It's finding out how much the stock bottom end with rain gap can take. And so then it becomes, if I'm going to do that, I might as well just put rods and pistons in it. If it has a forged crank, then that's a built motor. Then that's a whole different thing. That's no longer a big bang deal. I want to do some performance stuff on the 300 on the 4.9 liter Ford. I believe smaller mains equal less friction and bearing speed. Yeah, that's the theory. I just have never seen anybody show me what that does actually. Jeff, no, that is a good idea, going down in chamber size. That's a good idea. Six-liter now, 400 crank horsepower. Just finished the turbo exhaust for the billet wheel, 78, 70, 75, 78. eBay special shooting for 700 wheel horsepower. Good luck, Devin. Warfighter, if we big bang it, it's not going to come back to you. It's going to come back to you in pieces. That's the problem. I thought the big bang was a firing order thing. Oh, that was from the old Honda stuff. Yeah, normally when we do the big bang, we do that till something breaks. We didn't do that on the 1 6-liter because we just ran out of map sensor, but on the other ones, something broke. And on the 6-liter, it broke big. On the 5.3, one of them bent the rod and scuffed the piston. I think that was the 5.3. Might have been the 4.8. We damaged pistons and rods on all of them. Margie, thanks for showing up, man. What fuel injection or forced induction you think about using? I don't know. I don't know what the question is. I don't know if it's fuel injection or forced induction. I haven't run any of the Aussie Speed Ford heads because I haven't run one of the Ford motors yet. I haven't run one of the 300s. Aussie Speed did send me one for the Slant 6. So that's awesome of you guys. I'm like just like Iowa, I'm big in Australia too. But no, the guys from Aussie Speed are awesome. They sent one of the intake manifolds out, and I'm going to take a look and make sure that it's there. It should have been shipped to West Tech. I think it's down there now. So when we put the Slant 6 back together, I'll have that. And I have the 2-barrel. I have the 1-barrel. And I think Dulcich has another Clifford 4-barrel one that I can hopefully borrow from him. He hasn't put that motor in, I'm hoping. And we can do some good intake tests on that. I haven't played around with the smaller Ford with the 250. Have you busted the 5-liter Ford block yourself yet? No, I didn't. I haven't broke one yet. Best budget ECU system for boost on a small block Ford. I can't really tell you that because I've only ever run 2 of them. I've run Fast and I've run Holly, and both of them work well for what we were doing. I've never done a budget one. I've never done a budget performance test on any of those to know what they do. If they will give you the right air, fuel, and timing, and they'll do it consistently and not leave you stranded somewhere by braking, then they're pretty good. And I know that the Holly and the Fast system both do that pretty well. Small journal equals more RPM capable. See, I honestly don't agree with that. I think as an ultimate thing, if you're talking about, but the problem is the hot rod guys, these guys are talking about the small journal cranks versus a small journal versus a big journal. And guys are talking about this with Cleveland and Windsor stuff too. And the Pontiacs as well, the the different crank journal sizes, and the concern is that you have higher speed with a bigger journal, and that it wears the bearings out. But I disagree with that. I think that you would make small journal cranks for real high RPM, but for a 6,000 or 6,500 RPM, I think it makes no difference at all. And I don't think you'd see any power change from that. And I don't think you'd see any longevity change from that. Not run at the power levels that we're talking about and the RPM that we're talking about. If you're talking about a NASCAR motor that has to run 9,300 RPM for, for hours on end, then you want to do stuff like that. And then people talk about that as absolutes, just like they talk about things in Formula One. Oh, rod to stroke ratio, all of that. None of that matters in most of the stuff that people are doing on the street. If you're putting together a 5-liter Ford, you shouldn't be worried, or a small block Chevy, you shouldn't be worried because it has a 5.7 rod in it, because that's a bad rod to stroke ratio. It's not going to do anything. I know, because I've tested it. And so a lot of guys get wrapped up and worried about things that are at a really, really high level of racing that shouldn't really be concerned. We shouldn't be as concerned with, I don't think. The oils that we normally use Lucas, because they supply oil to the guys at West Tech. For my truck, I just put cheap stuff in it. I think it's more important that you change the oil than the brand that you use. I think lots of people have good oil. Mark said he saw a video where David Visor claimed to have made 411 foot-pounds of torque from an NA 289. So let me see what. I don't think that that's a big number, though. That's 1.42 torque per cubic inch. That's a pretty good number, but it's not like it's not even what most of the Engine Masters guys do. So it's not a big deal, I don't think. With a flat tappet cam, that's pretty good. But I'd like to see it. I know a lot of the stuff from back in the day. A lot of stuff is hearsay, and I'm not saying Visor didn't do it. I just would like to see it, and I'd like to see it with factory heads. Those guys are pretty good at porting, though, so maybe they made the factory heads good, and maybe their idea of a factory head was a Gurney Westlake head. Who knows? Chrysler single overhead cam 2-liter cam profiles had no overlap. It's not uncommon for a factory cam profile to have no overlap. Yeah, you can run the same firing order on your 351 that matches the 5-liter HO firing order, right? Yeah, any more the recommended oil, and more so the viscosity, although now they're getting very, very particular about oil for the late model stuff. So they want to run a very lightweight oil to get improved fuel mileage, because their fuel mileage testing was probably based on the fact that they had that oil in there. And then also they're probably choosing their oil based on, emissions, evaporation, and things like that. So all of that stuff now plays in, because they're getting really tight about all that stuff. Mark, I don't know. I haven't chosen an oil for that. Normally we run 530 and stuff. Tahoe Jones. Yeah, 1.5 horsepower per cubic inch would be 600 horsepower. Yeah, and that's the numbers for the Engine Master stuff was more like 1.65 or so. And guys can get 2 horsepower per cubic inch, or even a little more than that for real high horsepower, like high RPM drag race stuff. But for the RPM range that we were running, 1.65, maybe 1.7 in some of the stuff was a pretty big number. Yes, I've tested Scorpion stuff, not particularly the 182 rockers, but there are other stuff for small block Fords. A lot of the guys are using 520s and 020s or 030s because, again, if you've ever seen it, it pours like water. It's very, very thin, and it helps the guys get good mileage. Gas cars will be illegal in California by the end of the year. That's coming up pretty soon. I wonder why YouTube doesn't notify you guys. I wonder if there's something I need to go in and check to make sure that you guys are getting notified. Yeah, synthetic oil is a good idea. Yeah, 016. The OEMs are getting really specific about the things that they're using, and their level of testing goes beyond what we're talking about here. The experts that are there and the things that they're looking at are way different than us just thinking about power or even longevity. Their stuff goes way beyond that. You got notified 15 minutes ago, so right before we're getting ready to get off, you got notified. YouTube had you pre-scheduled, then shut you off. They didn't do that. I did that. I was trying to load one. I was trying to start the video and clicked on something because my mouse is kind of freaking out. It's all OG stuff. And so I had to start over. So I had to delete that video and then start and do a new one. And maybe that's why it shut off. The valve train is, Andrew, the valve train is always the thing that limits RPM on any kind of a street motor. Yeah, about an hour ago. That's kind of when we started, an hour and 22 minutes ago now. You should start the stream 15 minutes before you start the show. But then it's just sitting there not doing anything. None of the cars we're talking about, Dash, and none of those cars pollute. They all have catalytic converters on them, and they all actually reduce the amount of emissions. They draw in the bad air, and then they actually clean the air so it's cleaner as it comes out. Okay, guys, I have to get going. Thank you for showing up. I will be back tomorrow, and hopefully we'll have this 400 versus the 302 video, which will be interesting. And I hope everyone does the apples oranges things. And I also hope that everyone says the 400M isn't a real engine, only the 351M is, and that there's never a 400M. I want them all to say stuff because that's what I live for. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for showing up, man.